the Forces of Fantasy, Warhammer Fantasy and then some archive. I'm your host, GJ. Join me as we take a chronological look at all the materials that have been released for Warhammer Fantasy battles and related games. We're going to take a look at the First Citadel Compendium. The copy that I have in front of me I recently got through eBay and it is rather battered and bruised. There were some adverts that have been cut out, some things that you could send in. Fortunately, I found a PDF copy online that I could copy the missing pages from. If you take a look, by the way, at the Patreon page, if you are a patron, or then you can visit the Patreon page, and there you will see a sort of first impressions video of the Citadel Compendium, the copy that I have. So if you hear some creaking and scratching, that's probably the old tape that is keeping this thing together. Now, the First Citadel Compendium opens with an advert on the inside cover for Warhammer, the mass combat fantasy role-playing game, or better known nowadays as Warhammer First Edition. The title of the advert is Let's Smash Skulls, so very fitting with the picture of the Chaos Warrior Harry the Hammer, as he probably later became known, who is smashing with his Warhammer some skeletons that are coming his way. There's a jawbone of one of the skeletons flying off, so very fitting title there. Take a look at the video if you want to see what I'm talking about. Now, what I won't be doing is I won't be reading all of these articles aloud. You can probably find your own PDF copy if you want them, but I will be looking at some of the things that we have here and discuss them and of course read out some bits. So the first article in the Citadel Compendium is called Warhammer the Continuing Saga. This is a section of rules clarifications and also new rules. There are some things that they said we wanted to put into the rules for the first edition, but we simply ran out of space. So first it starts off with some rules clarifications. There's a little bit about the turn sequence, about shooting, return fire, fighting defensively. And then there are also some things that are added here as well. There are some weapon differentiations and other bonuses. So if you remember from the very first episode that we did, where we looked at the first of the first edition rule books, the ones with all the rules, there are some bonuses that you get if you have different weapon options, and they've simply added some more. So for example, if you are an armed monster with a strength +4, which I think would be 4 or more, you get +1 on your to kill roll. And if you fight with a light weapon versus skirmish, you get +1 on your initiative and +1 to hit. So there are some of these bonuses, some of them that are already mentioned in the main rulebook and some others that are new. These are listed in a handy table with a scissors symbol, so you can cut them out and paste them in your rulebook, or you can just, nowadays at least, make a photocopy of this and then use them if you want to use these extra rules. Some other rules that need some explanation are those for mounted figures. There's a whole page with some clarifications for mounts and riders, as well as some advanced rules for dismounting opponents. So you can choose in combat if you want to dismount your mounted opponent. And to do that, you have to you roll to hit, and then you have to declare your attention. You first have to declare your attention to dismount your opponent, and then roll to hit as normal. And for each hit, you roll a roll to dismount. That's another d6, to which you add +1 if you are armed with a lance, and +1 if you charged or countercharged in this turn. So then you compare that result to a table. On a 1 to 2 it has no effect at all. On a 3 to 4 you fail to dismount, you roll to kill as normal but with a -2 on the dice modifier, so you might still pierce your opponent's neck even if you fail to dismount him. And on a 5 to 6 you have unseated your opponent and you have to roll again. On a 1 to 4 the dismount has no complications, and on a 5 to 6 there are complications, and depending on what you roll next you get complications, like for example a foot gets caught in a stirrup and you will be dragged 1d6 inches by the mount and then disposed as concussed. Or you will be trampled. Trampled involves getting stood on a lot. This can hurt, count as 1 hit at strength attack of the mount. So there are some rules here which are rather fun, and I think this would also make for a nice little jousting game if you want to try that. At least that's what it sparks with me. And well, as we all know, especially in these first editions, the rules are more like guidelines anyway, to make up your own rules, to make up your own games. Next we get a couple of new creatures introduced. 2 new creatures, the Unicorn and the Pegasus. They get their own profile, and I'm not going to read them out, but Unicorn is slightly stronger than the Pegasus. Unicorns are magical creatures, basically good and semi-intelligent. They are sensitive to a person's aura, and they will flee or attack if approached by evil or chaotic types. They can be ridden by virgins, paladins, and some goodly heroes, and they nullify all magic within 6 inches of them. There's a percentage chance for enchantments that may or may not work on unicorns. And let's see. Yeah, there's some extra things about extra saving throws, and they automatically destroy all undead within 8 inches except for the more the bigger undead like liches and heroes, champions, personalities. No extra rules about a horn attack, but I'm rather sure that would have been in the profile, although the unicorn only has a strength of 3. So yeah, they in later editions they added the horn attack there. Pegasus got some less rules. It's a flying creature, and they can they are also semi-intelligent. At least it should be flying, but it says it's a winged horse, but it's not really set here to fly. It does say that it is often a normal horse with a chaos attribute. Now, chaos attributes we will discuss a little bit later on in this episode because they are at the end of the book. So you need a willpower of 8 or more to tame a Pegasus. Next we get a section on magicians and armor. Quite a few of you have expressed abject disgust and horror at the fact that we allow wizards to wear armor without penalty. Shrieks of disbelief in parentheses. So there is an advanced rules section here which say that wizards cannot perform magic if they are wearing shields, and they have to roll a fumble factor as normal, but they get to modify that with the level of armor that they wear. So it says here if you have a 6 up saving throw, then you get 1 pip of armor, and that you have to add to your, you have to add it to your fumble roll, I guess. So if you have 5, you have 2 pips, and so on. And if the fumble score is 13 or more, then you have to roll for a fumble. There's probably not a fumble score then. Doesn't really help that I never played this edition, so you roll for a fumble every time a spell is cast. Then you add the modifiers, and if that's 13 or more, then you have to roll for a fumble, apparently. So yeah, there might be some words confusion here, or there might be just some GJ confusion, which happens a lot, GJ getting confused. So yeah, let's not dwell on this too long, because we have a fun little thing in the next section, which is vampires. They wanted to include rules for vampires, but they didn't have room to do it. But ardent fans of Transylvania's favorite son have asked us to account for our omission, they say. So we have some rules for vampire here. You can become a vampire if you have an intelligence of 10, cool of 12, willpower of 8, and leadership of 3 minimum. Vampires, they work heavily with life energy. They supplement their own life energy by that of the victims. You do that by draining someone completely, and then let's see, what do you get then? You get 1d10 life energy extra, and you need to sustain their life requires 10 life energy points per day, which can be cut down to 5 points per day if the vampire remains in a comatose state in his coffin for daylight hours. So you need to suck some victims dry, and you can also have some long-term victims that must have the personal characteristics to make vampires. And then that victim gives you, let's see here, first attack will yield 1d6 life energy points, second attack 2d6, third 3d6, and so on until all the person's life energy points is used up. So this is one target that you drain multiple times until they are dead and then become a vampire themselves. Unless they are beheaded and buried with a stake through their heart and holy symbols and garlic and stuff like that. There's a little bit about vampires that they can become wizards, but that's not really what you want to do because they're not very good at being wizards. They can change into a wolf or a bat. There's some things about what you would expect from vampires, immune to things like fear, terror, morale. If a vampire's wounds are used up, they are not destroyed but disembodied. The body will fade and vanish and reappear in the vampire's coffin or safe space. So this makes it very important that the vampire maintains and protects his resting place. Games masters and players should remember that vampires are marvelously charismatic and sophisticated creatures. So this is your suave, Bela Lugosi, Dracula vampire that they have in mind here. Next we get some things like things about personal characteristics in special situations. So this is a whole new section, nothing to do with vampires anymore. So you get something that you can, if this is for the more role-playing thing. So there are some rules for bluffing here. If you want to bluff, you have to multiply your cool by 8, and that's a percentage. So it says here, if you have a cool of 7, then you will have 8 times 7 is 56% chance of success. And the GM should feel free to add or subtract according to his discretion. There's some things about, let's see, a few sample bluffs are here. So what's the next one? The next one is persuasion. You may try to persuade non-player characters to do things for them, and there are some examples for that as well. Also, again, chance of success is 8 times cool as a percentage, but in this case minus the intelligence, cool, and willpower of the guy that you're trying to persuade. And if you try to bribe them, you get a plus 1% per crown, or whatever the GM determines. Next there's a little rule section about firing arcs. Very interesting. It says all infantry guys have a 90-degree arc to the front, and cavalry have a 90-degree arc to the side at right angle to the front. It shows in the diagram only a 90-degree arc, in this case to the left of the cavalryman, the arm where the bow is in. I would assume that that is the 90-degree arc that you can fire in. It doesn't make much sense to take your bow up over the horse to fire, although of course trained mounted archers can do so. And they did account for that in the rules, because mounted troops in skirmish order may fire all around, but they suffer a -1 to hit penalty for firing outside of the 90-degree arc. Next, we go back to a new creature, Spectres. Spectres, ghost type thingies. The spiritual remains of long dead men, lost souls who are held to the earth because of some long ago vow or curse. It doesn't really say so, but I think it would be appropriate to have a vow or a curse like paint all your miniatures before you die. I know that a lot of people will get turned into specters, at least a lot of the Warhammer players that I know. So also get to painting, which I know that a lot of people who listen to podcasts like this do this while painting. So well done on slaying the grey while listening to this. So specters, they will not generally attack unless he is doing so to fulfill an oath. They give some examples for that. They are immune to non-enchanted weapon attacks. They may be dispelled by a necromantic banish undead spell as normal. And there is some rules for that with fumble factors as well. Spectres cause fear within 15 inches, terror within 5 inches on all normal living creatures. They attack by touch and cause no damage but have a paralyzing effect. So you have to roll a save as if for poison. And if you are paralyzed, you are out for at least an hour or 66 turns. There are some cure spells that you can that can help you get back on your feet. And player characters may roll to see which body part has been hit and lose power in that part only. You get a profile here for the Spectre. Nice little addition to games. I can see some potential here if you come across a graveyard or a tomb of a long lost warrior, long dead warrior, something like that. We've got some more advanced rules for the personal characteristics, not going over them, but the personal characteristics being cool, willpower, leadership, and intelligence. So there are some rules for that. If you have a score at a certain level, what will happen then? Now, this was the first of the articles. It's followed by a page that has been torn out or cut out of my version of the journal, which had the Citadel Compendium competition. Make your own character, send it in, and you can win prizes. There's a newspaper, Citadel Mailing Club news page there, where you can add some names and addresses, and then you get Mailing Club packages for a small amount of money. That's something, by the way, that's a trend in these books. You see those prizes and you think, oh man, I wish I was actually living in 1983 with some of that, some disposable income, and you could be a very rich guy in 2023. Now, the next article that we are going to discuss, that we're going to talk about, is called Warhammer and Science Fiction, with an exclamation mark. This article gives you the rules for more modern and futuristic weapons. Most of these are ranged weapons, I think all of them. And I think this might actually be the basis of what is later to become Warhammer 40k, or Rogue Trader as it was first called. So You need your own copy of Warhammer to use these rules, and it says here, interestingly enough, if you own a copy of Warhammer, then you probably realize that the rules are designed to be used, which is made bold. If you wish to change rules, redraw charts, invent new creatures, anything could be possible. After all, most of the enjoyment from a game comes from invention. So people, please get creative is the message that they are putting out here. Not going over all of these weapons, but there are some interesting ones. You get a laser pistol, which is your regular Han Solo shot first thing. You get a needler, which is a air gun that fires a steel needle, which is usually poisoned. They can have a magazine with up to 100 needles. It takes a full turn to fit a new magazine. But after each shot, the weapon needs to be repressurized, which takes a complete move phase. So you get 100 needles, but you still need to pump up your air gun there, even if you don't have to refit the entire magazine. So yeah, that sounds a little bit like a lot of needles, but not enough time to use them. Next one is the Hand Flamer, which got a lovely little mishap table. If you roll a 1 on 2 hits, then you roll a d6, and on a 1 the weapon is useless and you are unharmed, and on anything above a 1 then the weapon explodes with an increasing radius of hits and an increasing number of hits on you. Next one is the Flame Lance, which is more or less described as a lance. It resembles an ordinary lance, but it has a button on the tip that shoots 1d6 strength 5 hits 3 times a day. Handguns, these are your modern type handguns. Rifles are also your modern type rifles. There are some different styles here. The Victorian type rifle, the single shot, early 20th century rifles with up to 10 bullets, and late 20th century rifles which have sustained fire, single shots or sustained fire. You get muskets, and then they ask, what's futuristic about muskets? Well, if you're a medieval peasant, then a musket is futuristic. So it gives you the rules for muskets as well. Shotguns, either single-barreled or double-barreled. Bolt guns, which is definitely going to be a familiar word if you know anything about 40k or are of my era where you started with Games Workshop paints like Bolt Gun Metal. Grenades, rules for grenades, and vortex grenades as well, with a little diagram there for how a vortex moves using a d10. It gives you well, basically, if you roll a 1, it moves straight forward. If you roll a 6, it moves straight towards you. And then it's divided in increments of, well, 1/5 of a circle. No, of course not 1/10 of a circle, because there's 10 things. So yeah, that's how these vortices move after launching a vortex grenade. And then there are some rules for fight packs, which are the things I believe that Space Marines and other futuristic stuff carry on their backs, the ones with the jetpacks that allow you to hop and move, and they can also explode, of course, and do a lot of damage, so fun rules there. Moving on in this article, there are some suggestions. If you use futuristic weapons, then you would probably want to put your units in a loose formation, because otherwise, if you throw a single grenade on them, you will have a lot of carnage. So they're just basically saying everything can go in a loose formation where all the models in the unit are within 2 inches of each other, and you can even split those units. For example, saying a sergeant saying, "You men follow me," and the rest go around the back. And then there is a sample scenario, well, not really a scenario, but more like campaign ideas about a Swedish banker living in London 1983, the present it says here, so yeah, just to remind you, 1983 is the present, who has discovered some, who wants to investigate some newly discovered remains in Pakistan, and then you need to assemble a party, and the GM is given some ideas of what can happen there. All written by Rick Priestley, by the way, and it then gives you some tables for, well, you can also do different time zones like the Jurassic, the Iron Age, or the regular time zone and place where you are now. Another alternative is to adopt a free-form system with a chart saying, for example, the first 5% are in 500 BC, 6 to 10 in 300 BC, etc. And then you also get to roll for different planets: Earth, Mars, Moon, Alpha Centauri, Dimension of the Black Yungon. No idea what that is. But yeah, that's so basically it says here you can make up your own stuff and go ahead and do that and go fight battles in space. Next we get a very big section with drawings of miniatures. They say in the introduction that they chose to put in drawings instead of photographs because you just don't know what the quality of photographs is going to be in print, so they chose to more accurately represent their miniatures by doing drawings. So if you ever wanted to know why those old catalogs had drawings of miniatures in them, that's the reason. After the miniatures section, we come to a Warhammer scenario, the legend of Kremlo the Slann. Kremlo was an orphan Slann, washed up on the shores of southern Lustria. Here he was found and adopted by the chieftain of the Norse village of Skeggi. Despite the vile and rather sickening appearance of the infant Kremlo, Harold Stoutback, who was a fine man and an outstanding foster parent, treated him exactly as one of his own sons, though quite why he did this is less than clear. Now, before this tale can be fully understood, it must be explained that each of the many tribes of the Slann were distinguished by unique markings along their spines. Kremlo was a reptile Slann. His spine was bright blue. He was of the blue-spined Spik tribe. Anyway, life went on in the Stoutback household in more or less normal fashion for 20 or so years, until one fateful spring day Harold Stoutback and Ven, his oldest natural son, were out hunting in the mountains. Actually, they had been ambushed and killed by bandits, but as yet no one in Skeggi knew of this. This left Kremlo as a technical leader of a Norse thorp, a unique position for a reptile. He was going to regret this day, badly, but little did he realize the sort of grandiose hassle currently speeding his way through the cool oceanic streams. His tribe were in their spawning cycle. The sporadic phenomenon was marked by the young adult males painting their skin, forming warrior cliques and infusing sacred herbal preparations. Then, frenzied and helplessly manic as a result of these religious narcotics, they would take to the open sea for weeks, sometimes even months, and cause trouble all along the coast of Lustria. Kremlo was at home when about 36 half-crazed Slann hooligans lumbered out of the water and butchered a group of fishwives who had been constantly mending nets on the seashore. Immediately all hell broke loose. Most of the village's warriors were with Stoutback in the mountains. Kremlo, a few fishermen, and the local berserkers who had been drinking at the time became involved in a bloody fracas with the Slann braves. Eventually, after tremendous numbers of teeth, bones and limbs had been smashed or cracked, Kremlo and the settlers beat off the Slann. A brief inspection of the corpses proved all of the Slann to be of Kremlo's own tribe. They were blue-spined Spiks. That evening, while Kremlo was still floundering in the sea of rage and terminal anger, word arrived of Stoutback's recent demise. Kremlo was now chieftain. This had always been Stoutback's wish, and most of the village reluctantly accepted. Some, Kremlo's 2 younger stepbrothers mainly, were less than happy about the whole thing, but they kept quiet about it. By the time dawn broke, things were fairly tense in Skaggy. The berserkers, steeped in claggy gore, had been drinking all night. God, spelled G-H-O-D by the way, God, they were in a bad way. Kremlo was already beginning to crack. Could it be that he too was suffering the subtly disturbing effects of the Slann spawning cycle? Nobody had got much sleep. Sometime around midday, Kremlo and the berserkers had decided that revenge was necessary. Retribution became the order of the day. So they decided to haul out the warboat and cross the gulf to central Lustria. Kremlo's instincts would lead him to his tribal home's spawning grounds. There the bloodletting would really start. Talk of genocide was rampant. The wounded from the previous day still wailed pitifully. They set sail by evening. Throughout the voyage, Kremlo behaved nervously, pacing up and down, talking to himself. The berserkers refused to stop drinking. Heroically they drank, keeping themselves awake by singing berserker songs. Sven and Ben, Kremlo's 2 youngest stepbrothers, secretly plotted to kill Kremlo and get themselves out of the whole mess. The warriors had sworn their allegiance to the Stoutback line. They were stoic, as was their way. Kremlo led them all, as straight as he could sail, to Zapotek, his tribe's Estruin's home. What happened there is unknown. None of those on the boat were ever seen again. Perhaps it would be desirable to discover their fate by gaming this tale. All the events, characters and motives are covered below. What a lovely introduction. Slann, of course, in this edition are not yet the sitting toads on palanquins carried around by temple guard, nor on floating palanquins carried around by themselves. Slann are, well, lizardmen, frogmen, reptilians that walk upright. They are depicted here as having the webbed feet of frogs, but more clawed hands, and a face which is a little bit a cross between a frog and a lizard. So a different type altogether. If you want to play this game, there are 2 encounters here. First one at Skaggy and then the one at the Blue Spine Spik homeland Zapotek. Anywhere between 2 and 6 players may take part. Each player must take either one of the parts listed below. You need a Game Master and Kremlo, those 2 are essential. And then the other ones are the Slann, the younger brothers Sven and Ben, the berserkers, the villagers. They have no part in the journey to Zapotek or the fighting there. And the clansmen who are still in the mountains with Harold Stoutback during the attack on Skaggy. Now Kremlo, the central character of this tale, before I describe him, let's first take a brief look at the picture that's above there. You see a Norse berserker with a double-bladed axe who is hitting a Slann from behind. There's some blood splattering out. And in true 80s comic book style fashion, it's got the words Tksplosh and Glurk written next to them. This is like those the Batman animated what are the interruptions whenever Batman or Robin hit a bad guy. You don't see them actually hitting something, but then they got this puff and kapow and stuff like that on there. So yeah, lovely little picture there. So Kremlo, the central character, as long as he's alive, he may give orders to the clansmen, the berserkers and the villagers, also to the brothers, but they need not obey. He carries a vial of poison, and if he pours it into the spawning pool, then he will wipe out the Slann preborn. This would be a vile deed indeed, an awful and terrible blow against the Blue Spine Spik. If Kremlo succeeds in doing this, he can treat the whole campaign as won. Now, I'm not going over all the rules and stats for these characters, but we do see here that each player, each faction has its own objectives. So for Kremlo, the player objectives are in Skeggy to stay alive and kill 4 Slann, and in Zapotec to poison the spawning pools and kill 6 Slann. For the Berserkers, in Skeggy they have to kill at least 7 Slann and lose from 2 to 4 men, I'm assuming that's the maximum, and in Zapotec lose 2 to 5 men and kill at least 8 Slann. In the younger brothers, in Skeggy they both have to stay alive and kill Kremlo, and in Zapotec either brother has to stay alive and kill Kremlo. The villagers, they are, you can lose no more than 20 casualties, but fishwives count as double. The clansmen, they don't have any special rules there, special objectives, and for the Slann, in Skeggy you have to kill a dozen Norse and lose no more than 6 Braves, and in Zapotec you have to kill all the Norse and protect the spawning pools. So yeah, lots of different objectives there, so this can be a fun game with lots of backstabbing going on. You get here a map of Skeggy, the village on a cliff. There are some sand dunes and the woods and the stream, and there's a little bay where the Slann come ashore. And then on the next page you get a larger map of the hinterlands. You got a gorge, a river going through a gorge, which is protected by some floating sentries, which are in the Slann section, described in the Slann section. The jungle is more or less impenetrable. They can only be crossed by pathways. There are some pathways here and there. There are some huts, and then at the end of the winding gorge you find on one side the spawning pools, and then connected by a rope bridge to the other side a step pyramid with the Herald's headquarters, which is the starting point for all the Imperial troops. What are Imperial troops doing here? Well, they are part of the Slann roster. For the Slann, you roll 4d6 to determine the number of Braves attacking the village at Skeggy, and at Zapotec you have to use the instructions on the map to determine the quantity of the attacker. The characteristics are given, and you get 9 different types. One of them is an Imperial Herald. You get Low Swamp Palace Guard. You get some Empire Soldiers, Tribesmen with Blowpipe with Water Sides, Shore Warrior Leader, Eunuch Slave Soldier, and Braves with Blowpipe. So those are the armies of the Slann, and there are some detachments of Imperial troops posted at Zapotec, which are led by a single herald, and the Slann player is represented by this single model, the herald. So if he's killed, then one of the low swamp guards and possibly a different player will take over. So lots of fun things to do here. There are some rules for alcoholism. Certain groups or characters can be subject to alcoholism. Every time any kind of action or fighting begins, roll 2d6 for the group of alcoholics. On a 2 to 5, only just started drinking, no effect. On a 6, rosy glow, -2 initiative. On a 7, intoxicated, -2 initiative. Weapon skill and bow skill are also at -2. On an 8, they are drunk, as intoxicated, but the figure has already lost most of his or her ability to feel pain and so may take an extra wound point. On a 9, they are roaring drunk, as drunk but also stupid. On a 10, they are senseless, which is as roaring drunk, but the initiative penalty is increased to -3, as are the weapon skill and bow skill penalties. For each blow you have to roll a d6. On a 1 to 3 you get +2 to kill, and on a 4, 5, 6 you get -2 to kill. And on 11 or 12 they are blind drunk, which is the same as senseless, but the figure also becomes subject to the following rules. May only see things within 12 inches, is subject to drunken frenzy, must make a roll for frenzy each turn enemy are in sight. And the last one, roll 2d6 at the end of your active turn, a score of 2, and the figure has drunk himself sober and suffers no further alcoholic effects. Is it possible to drink yourself sober? If that's so, that's a trick that I need to learn. If however the score on the 2 dice is 11 or 12, the figure passes out for 2d6 turns. Roll again for alcoholism when he comes around. So yeah, awesome to have those extra rules. And there are some rules here as well for if you have halflings and dwarves, they are less sensitive to alcoholism. So this is just like a general rule. I guess that is included here as part of the scenario, but that you can also use as part of other games. Some rules for wizards, which get some extra numbers added to their fumble score. And well, players and game masters, it finishes off here, are invited to elaborate and further expand the rules for alcoholism. Who knows, one day we may well see the emergence of alcoholics as a character class, and then anti-alcoholics. Welcome to the 80s. Now, the sad part is that this article finishes off with a Slann offer. You can buy the miniatures that are represented in this scenario. You can either buy them separately for 40 pence each, or you can offer 12 Norse berserkers, 20 assorted villagers and peasants, 12 assorted fishwives, and 12 assorted Norse clansmen for only £17. Offer 2 the Slann, 4 Low Swamp Palace Guards, 6 Slann Imperial Soldiers, 12 Slann Tribesmen with blowpipes, 30 Slann Tribesmen with water sides, 12 assorted Eunuch Slave Warriors, 1 Slave Warrior Leader, and 24 assorted Braves with tomahawks and blowpipes for only £32, or both offers for £40, which is 154 models, metal models I should say, for £40. If you did this back in the day, then by now you can probably sell them and not have to work another day in your life. So yeah, this is a lovely little scenario here. It does require a game master to play this. It's just a little bit more fussy than the Ziggurat of Doom scenario, which I still plan to do, by the way. So when I finish, I should say, the Witch Hunter Warband, I will probably, before moving on to other warbands, see if I can get some hobgoblins painted up and 2 more dwarves, and then I can play out the Ziggurat of Doom scenario. That is in the back of the first edition rulebook, the first edition core rulebook. Now on the next pages we get a couple of adverts, and these had me scratching my head a little bit because there are 3 supplements that are announced here, or at least 2 Warhammer supplements and 1 new sci-fi role-playing system called Rogue Trader. Force of Fantasy is announced, which was released in 1984, and this will actually be the next supplement that we will take a look at. I plan to release an unboxing video of this on the Patreon, so if you want to see what's in the Forces of Fantasy box, then I invite you to become a patron of the podcast. Not only do you get access to extra bonus content, but you'll also help support the show. And if this is something that you like and that you want to hear more of, then please go ahead and do so. And also tell your friends, of course. Forces of Fantasy, we will take a look at that one in the next episodes. The other one announced is Realm of Chaos by Brian Ansell. Realm of Chaos discusses the marks of chaos, chaotic attributes, chaos champions, role-playing a champion of chaos, chaos pantheon, chaos gods, their followers, demons, lots of other things here. I'm not going to list them all, but this is of course referring to the 2 books that were released in 3rd edition. I believe they were 1988 and 1990. Realm of Chaos, Slaves to Darkness, and Realm of Chaos, The Lost and the Damned. I always forget which book was released in which year, but we will discuss them when we get there. Now remember, this is October 1983, so they already announced this, and it would still be 5 years before we got those books. That means that these books have been at least 5 years in the making, and there's probably a little bit of history here that I hopefully will be able to look up by the time we get to the Realm of Chaos books, why it took so long. I think it has to do with them just hammering out the kinks of Warhammer First Edition, because First Edition was released in 1983, then Forces of Fantasy in 84, and Second Edition also in 84. And then we got some of these supplements for Second Edition, and then in 87 I believe it was on to Third Edition. So these first few editions, they followed one another really quickly. So that's probably a reason why they put off publishing the Realm of Chaos books for such a long time. Now the next one that's announced is Rogue Trader, which was released in 1987, if I remember correctly from looking it up. So Rogue Trader, of course, the first edition, or how should I say this without offending too many people? Let's just call it First Edition 40k and not care about offending people. Because, well, if people want to get offended, then they will probably do so anyway, whether I take the effort or not. So yeah, both of these game systems, both of these supplement and game system, are announced here in 1983, although it's still a few years away before they would hit the shelves. Before we finish off this book, we do get one more article, and this article discusses the Mark of Chaos. We get here rules that you use for chaos creatures. Chaotic attributes are strange powers, disfigurations, and mutations that mark the bodies and souls of many creatures whose lives have been touched by chaos. Merely dwelling in a portion of the multiverse where chaos lurks close by will bring the curse of the Mark of Chaos upon a section of the population. In human society, to bear the mark is to be an outcast, but goblins, orcs and the like regard it as an honor and a blessing. Evil creatures tread a path very close to that of chaos, and all evil or unpleasant things, including humans, have a particular chance of bearing chaos attributes. Now these attributes depend on what kind of creature you encounter. For example, a Minotaur has a 5% chance of getting a chaos attribute. You get here a table with a list of creatures, and then chaos attribute, it says a percentage, and sometimes it says creature of chaos minus 10% or minus 20%. And then you also get a D100 generation table. So if you roll something on a D100, if you say, for example, want a random encounter, you just roll a D100, and if you now roll up, let's say 43, then you get hobgoblins, and if you get 20 hobgoblins, then on average 4 of them will have a mutation, because hobgoblins have a 20% chance of getting mutations. Ordinary men have only a 0.25% chaos attribute chance, and evil men and servants of chaos have higher chances. Followers of the law and goodly or saintly men are respectively never or very rare. There are some subtables for demons, undead and rare creatures. And what chaotic attributes you have depends on it's always one or more. So if you have chaotic attributes, you roll a d6. On a 1 or 2, you have 1 attribute. On a 3, you have 2. On a 4, you have 3. And on a 5 or 6, you have d6 attributes. So there is a chance that if your one creature has 1 attribute, that the whole regiment has identical attributes. And there are some rules here and some helps. It says for if you, for example, have you can also do this in groups of 5 and then just multiply the chance by 5. And then if you roll it, one of those in the group has one of those mutations. A lot of the mutations give you some extra things. For example, if you have great horns, it will give you plus 1/2 toughness, which is a little bit curious to see how that would work if you have plus 1/2 of a stat, especially with toughness, which is a stat which has a letter in this case and not a number. So there's a letter category. There's also, for example, a chance that you become a vampire, or there's a chance that you have a attribute called Weapons Master. And there's also a chance for non-useful attributes, which leads you to another table. They get things like a flaming skull face, or headless, or a very warty skin, big ears, long nose, eye stalks, lots of conversion opportunities here. And then finally we get a list with the different chaotic attributes, and this explains how these attributes work. So I haven't come across what that plus 1/2 does in the case of the toughness, for example. It can give you a modification on your weapon skill, strength, toughness, wounds, initiative, or attack. So there's nothing here on movement. For example, if you are moronic, you get -1 on your weapon skill and -2 on your initiative. If you are mindless, you get those 2 as well, but you do get +1 to your toughness. So yeah, I don't know what that plus 1/2 is. I should see if I can find that at some point. Or maybe somebody who has played in this edition can tell me a little bit about how that works. Or maybe it's just that the plus 1/2 doesn't do anything, you round it down, but if you get 2 things that give you plus 1/2 of something, then you get +1. I'm just speculating here. So yeah, you get some examples of chaotic attributes, including drawings of the creatures. One of them is particularly disturbing, which is a spawn of chaos that used to be a harpy. You see a lot of eye stalks, some extra arms, you still see a lot of feathers, some wings, and for some reason the breasts of the harpy have remained untouched by chaos. It gives you a list of the attributes and what happens, and the stat line and everything. So yeah, this is basically it for this episode of Forces of Fantasy, because we've come to the end of the Citadel Compendium. I can keep trying to say Citadel Journal, but it's Citadel Compendium. The final pages give you some conversion examples. What can you do if you want to make a conversion of, in this case, a lion-esque creature that has a long giraffe-like neck or snake-like neck and the head of a dwarf with some extra horns on it. So it tells you how to cut and where to drill. And then the the compendium closes out with a section called Eldritch Epistles, which is people writing in with questions such as, why don't we have, for example, halflings or gnomes as PC classes? And the reason is we didn't have enough space. And some other rules questions that get answered here, including one of the people who didn't really ask a question but did send in an illustration, a bit of fan art that they published. And then finally, on the final 2 pages, you get a nice handy little overview of the different tables: the combat, to hit, to kill, save, weapon bonus, shooting, to hit, to kill, save, and range chart. And on the final page, the magic spells level 1 to 4 and some basic profiles.